So I'm going to try that again. So I'd like to introduce my co-curator, Dr. Frank Boyer. My name is Hanna Maria Sawka, and I'm also the daughter of the artist. So I'd like to start just by kind of telling you a little bit of the backstory, so you can understand the dream, who the dreamer is, before we head into the dream. And also the show that's here is very much built around the backstory. So we're going to take it back to the 1970s. My father was an artist in what was then communist-occupied Poland. It was basically a by-proxy government that was controlled from Moscow. There was an agreement called Yalta, where what would later be called the Iron Curtain, the border of it was determined. Poland was an ally during World War II and continued fighting. So a lot of Poles actually kind of feel that was a betrayal. But we don't have to get into the details of history. But we certainly did end up behind an Iron Curtain, and there certainly were aspects of being in a prison to this situation. It was a repressive situation. There were all kinds of methods to kind of, I mean, there were people literally targeted, executed. There was that kind of oppression, but there was also just oppression of culture. You know, there wasn't freedom of speech. There was censorship. If you wanted to print a business card, it had to go through the censorship bureau. Nothing could get printed, you know, without being checked. And if you were corresponding, let's say with family that was lucky enough to be in Chicago, every single letter was read by somebody. And it arrived to you in a plastic envelope with stamps on it saying, you know, it's been censored. If you are interested in knowing what life was like in more detail, we actually have available, it's a culinary biography, but it's got 100 pages of narrative that talks about, you know, where we came from. I have to tell you about this because soon you'll know why, and it has to do with the show. So my father was, like many other artists, creating posters at this time because it was the only way you could make a living. There was no art market. There weren't commercial galleries, and so you would get a flat fee of $16 and no royalties. And actually the communist government made tons of money, millions of dollars, selling posters that now are known as the School of the Polish Poster. My father would try to get his work out there through, he would work with cabarets, theaters. He would find all kinds of ways to get his work out there, and he was already marked, in a sense, from when he was born, on the wrong side of politics. So he didn't even like feel he like had a chance to like even conform in this place. His father had already been jailed. He was a political prisoner right after World War II. He was tortured and beaten in jail, where he was held for my father's youngest childhood. So anyway, here he was. He, just so you know what he looked like, he had long hair and round glasses. People who dressed in the hippie style behind the Iron Curtain, similarly, by the way, to people in this area, were expressing protest against the regime. So he wore his opinion, you know, in the very style. So he had just met my mother, and actually they had just married, when one day they got a phone call from somebody, from an artist that, he was a graphic designer that collaborated with the regime. Basically, like, you know, people were like, oh, that's one of those guys. He lived in a very nice, comfortable villa in one of the best neighborhoods in Warsaw. And he said, we're having an American over for dinner, and we'd like you to come and make sure you bring some of your work. Now, what was happening in a situation like this? I mean, you're wondering, like, why is this guy who's collaborating, inviting this trouble guy, right, who looks like a hippie? It was a very cynical thing. They wanted to trot out an artist that looked, you know, dressed in a fashion that, you know, resonated a certain way for Westerners, and show that, hey, we have artists who get to be free and get to express themselves. And we're cool here. We're cool behind the Iron Curtain, right? So my father you know, sensed that. He kind of knew what was going on, but he was very curious. He wanted to meet an American. This really was a prison. You didn't meet Americans, right? So he and my mother went to, yeah, you could move the slide. Oops. They went to meet, maybe it went the wrong, yeah, here we are. Oh, did I say he looked like a hippie? And my mom, and this is Bob. And I'm sorry, I didn't have Photoshop to like straighten the image. Anyway, so they go to this dinner and they meet a gentleman named Robert Schulberg, and they have a really good conversation over dinner. And my parents think they will never see this person again. And at the end of dinner, my father, he had shown him, he brought prints and posters, he had brought a roll, and you know, like these posters couldn't even do anything for my dad. It's not like he could sell them or whatever. And he gave a big roll of posters as a gift at the end of dinner to Bob, which just kind of knocked his socks off. And 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in a plastic envelope with stamps on it from Bob, thanking my father so much for this beautiful gift. And my dad wrote back to him, and my dad could speak English pretty well, but he couldn't write, so he created a letter that was, wait a minute, did we lose it? Did maybe it go too far? Oh no, maybe go one more. Did we lose it?
It's the next one.
Oh, then go to it. This one. Oh,
Oops.
Whoa, okay. So he couldn't write a letter really. So he decided to make an image that showed Bob how he's feeling and what was going on, and that's what's happening up there. We kind of are like, I think it's got two titles, 1 to 1, but over here it says "The Story of My Laughing Twin." So he sends this to Bob as his like letter, like how I'm doing. He eventually started writing more and more actually in English, and they really started corresponding. Bob was curious about this person from behind the Iron Curtain, and my dad was curious about this person who lived in Beverly Hills, in California. So that was the first letter my dad sent. I was born pretty soon after, and my father sent a letter with a drawing of baby me, and Bob sent a beautiful sweater, which made it past whoever was checking the mail. And anyway, this very warm correspondence started, and it was really two people who were divided by a wall, and from two different universes. So things got worse for my dad, and better. He won an award in France at the International Festival of Painting. It was completely unexpected. Actually, the authorities allowed this one curator from a museum in Warsaw to propose painters, expecting them to lose so they could also bury the curator, because he was from a family of generations of scholars, and they didn't like him. Herman Dorsfer was his last name. He's not alive anymore, but a wonderful man. It backfired because my dad won. In fact, he won 2 awards. Herman Dorsfer couldn't be fired. And my dad got an invitation from what was about to open the Pompidou Center in Paris, which is the factory-like building in Beaubourg. And the communists wouldn't let my dad go to Paris. He'd go and ask for permission. Can I please go? And they'd be like, no. So in the meantime, my dad organized a Trojan horse kind of an exhibition where he had art that was uncensored actually make it into public exhibition. I'm not going to go into the details, but it was a mess for the authorities. People had seen it. They couldn't really close it. Some foreigners saw it. It was popular. It was a complete headache, and at this point, they invited my dad to the Ministry of Culture and gave him 3 options. They said, you could cooperate with us, and you will have a studio, a house, life will be good, we'll publish things, you'll have exhibitions. Option 2, you will teach art in a school somewhere out in the boondocks, and you'll never, ever, your work will not be seen. or you go to Paris and you leave and you do not come back. And my dad chose option 3. And he was told, when he picked option 3, and take all your work with you, which he did. So we went to Paris, and he started, his residency at the Pompidou Center, and things seemed good. He had a commercial exhibition in Paris, in The Hague, word started getting out. There were publications writing about him. And now this is something that the authorities likely didn't foresee, and when they saw him start getting successful, they got nervous, and the government changed in France. There was an election. The new government didn't like what was happening at the Pompidou Center. They canceled a show that my dad was a part of, and to make a long story short, Poland was buying buses from France, and they asked, throw in this dissident, we actually want him back. And a very kind person called my dad from the Pompidou Center and tipped him off. He said, you're going to be deported in 3 days. You've got to get out of France now. So Dad called Bob, and Bob called an immigration attorney who just said, okay, it sounds bad, but just go to the US Embassy, just go. Bob said, I'm going to sell some art, this artwork, because my dad had been in the US. I don't want to go into too much detail. From France, not from Poland. But Bob said, I can sell this and get you tickets. You go to the embassy. My parents went to the embassy and lo and behold, got visas and did not understand why or how. Years later, they would find out that it was thanks to the loophole that had been lobbied for by Peggy Guggenheim during World War II, where outstanding artists, also spies and scientists, could get out immediately from a hot situation. So that's how we ended up in New York in 1977. And then here we are in the US. Luckily, there were already people who'd met my father, knew the work, had recommended him. His first job was doing op-ed illustrations to the New York Times and to the Boston Globe. But we were cut off from our family and our friends, and Bob became my surrogate grandfather and kind of a surrogate dad for my dad. And one of the first things he started doing was opening doors in some LA galleries. So my dad started showing, and actually a lot of works in there. You'll notice some of them have notes that say, that this was shown mostly in the Joan Ancrum Gallery. But anyway, like my dad didn't really get who Bob was. Eventually he kind of figured out, oh, he's from this Hollywood family. His cousin is Bud, who wrote On the Waterfront. But Bob was this great blessing and very dear friend. And we were refugees. We had $52 when we arrived in New York City. Bob was one of the people who helped us. There were others, Herb Lubalin, actually, in particular. But that's how we were able to start our lives here and, live in freedom. And it's not all pretty. A member of our family was killed in what looks like a political assassination. But my father continued supporting the opposition in Poland from here. He started showing work in galleries and doing kind of a lot of cool things. So I wanted to give you that background. The kind of other part of the story, so you know a bit about the dreamer. This is Bob in his living room, and that's a painting of my dad's. And we're gonna kind of, I guess, do we have any more? Oh yes, we have one more photo. Okay, so this is actually, so Bob would go to every show of my dad's, whether it was in LA or in New York. And this is Bob. This is my dad's gallerist at the time, Sid Deutsch in New York City. And that's my dad. And, so he was truly like our family member. We had big events and he was there always, And Dad would, to thank him because sometimes, he opened the door to the galleries in LA. So my father would say, pick a piece from this show. So, for example, this the 12-panel phone booths painting is an example of that. And also, he would just give gifts And you'll see actually like happy birthday on at least one of the paintings in there. So do look for the backstory. It's actually in the paintings. If you go and look around and look at the dedications, that's where that's coming from. So it really meant a lot to us because it's not only about survival, but it's about having, you know, family in the sense of sometimes your family is created, right? And in those days, we never expected to be able to reunite with our family and friends because it didn't look to anyone like communism would suddenly fall. You know, that was something that really people weren't expecting. And that, of course, was a game changer. But if you're in a place and, you know, you are strangers, it's very important that there are people who don't treat you as strangers. So that's the backstory, and I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Boyer.
Okay, California Dream, number 1.
Talk into it.
Oops, California Dream, number 1. Here we are. So, again, just as a little coda to what Hanna said, in a situation as existed in Poland at that time, you had to be very careful about who you trusted and who you connected with. And Bob and Jan connected immediately and remained friends for the remainder of Bob's life. He died, I believe, in 1991, or
1990,
late 1990.
Yeah.
That friendship impressed me a lot when I came out here to photograph that collection because we knew that Claire had a lot of works that had been given to her family by Jan over the years. We knew about this friendship.
So Claire's Bob's daughter.
Bob's daughter, yes. And when I saw the works and was photographing them, over and over again, I was reading these dedications, you know, to my great friend Bob, or to Bob and Lorraine. Lorraine was Bob's wife. And I realized how important Bob was to Jan in his vision of what America was. And that was sort of the starting point for this idea of a show about Jan's dream of America as something that included Bob. It couldn't have existed as it was without his relationship with Bob. But it also began in Poland before he met Bob. Jan had experienced American propaganda that had come into Poland, and he had built a kind of dream of what America stood for. You know, a place of color, a place of freedom, a place that contrasted with where he was. And he always, because he knew that that dream had been built from materials to which he had access in Poland, he always saw it with a very kind of critical or skeptical eye. So even in the beginning, his California dream, and seeing California as sort of the Golden West of the Golden West, always had in it a sense that maybe things are not what they seem. You know, maybe my hopes and my dreams are, in a sense, fooling me. And this image kind of brings out that theme. This is a very early painting. This was done in 1977. Jan came, oops, Jan came to America with his family in November of 1977. So this painting was either painted in France before they left, but no, it couldn't have been painted in France. They couldn't have brought it.
He couldn't have transported
He couldn't have brought it.
Yeah.
This was painted right after he came to America. So already it shows a kind of skepticism, because she's so attractive, but she's so unreal. Okay? So...
Wait, can I just,
yes.
I do want to say that besides, there was propaganda, right? But the communists allowed, for example, American films that kind of had a critical eye on America so for example, films of the American New Wave, films by John Cassavetes, Scorsese's work, you know, these kinds of films were let in. They didn't let in the musicals, by the way. I went, after communism fell, and after I did college, I went back to film school in Poland. That's where I got my MFA. And I was shocked that, like, people didn't know who Judy Garland was. And, like, they hadn't seen all these musicals, which would have made them just think, oh, my God, America is awesome, because they're just happy, joyful, beautiful films, right? Instead, people were kind of seeing this dark side. But on the other hand, seeing that filmmakers could show this dark side also made people think, wow, that's a cool place. Like, here are people expressing, you know, complex, you know, and difficult things. And also American literature, Steinbeck, Faulkner, my dad read all of this too. So he was also seeing some great American art, basically, and culture. But it was also very highly curated by, you know, by the higher-ups in this system. So I just wanted to, you know, throw that in there, that, you know, the vision that he was getting was pretty complex and nuanced.
It was very complex and nuanced, and it always had a sense of, you know, auto-critique in it, and skepticism. You know, in addition, this painting would have been done immediately after Jan came to New York City, and in 1977, New York City was noted for its income disparity and a lot of graffiti and crime. So I'm sure that that had an impact on his vision as well.
It was cooler than it is now. Sorry.
In some ways. Okay, and this is a kind of continuation of the theme. You know, the reality of competition, and kind of the image of capitalism as a context of unbridled competition, and how does this work, and is it really allocating resources in the best way? Is it the best thing for people? You know, Jan had, certainly he'd grown up under communism, and he certainly had strong feelings about that system. But in a sense, he had strong feelings and reactions to the idea of system. And he was always questioning, how does this affect human beings? How is this impacting individuals? So in this case, we have the archetypal agonistic situation, competition situation. And we see again, you know, that there's a kind of falseness to the image.
Oh, and in case you don't watch boxing, like me, this painting is called Round Number 16, and there are never round 16s. The limit is 15 rounds, so, you know, now, I just want to put that out there because you probably don't watch boxing like me.
Gone one round over the edge on this one.
I do also just want to add, because it was something my dad talked about, and I think it informs this painting as well, but he was very concerned about inequality, and these are people of color who are pictured here. And I remember him commenting on, like, like people being treated like gladiators, like, you can, like kind of like, is Hoop Dreams, that documentary? Like, it's like if you go into this sport where some of them you will get concussions all the time, that's how you can make it. It's like there aren't a lot of options, and I remember him expressing, directly, like, talking about, his concern about that. And that being a sign of this kind of inequality, basically. So I did want to, throw that in there, having heard him talk about it.
And Jan was also very upset with the idea of commodification and objectification of women as a function of commodification. And this piece references that, or articulates that idea. And again, if you look at his work reads immediately. There's a lot to see at once that draws you in, but if you look at it more closely, or you spend more time with it, you begin to see ancillary parts of the painting that you start to notice that complicate and deepen the message of the painting. And this happens over and over again. He has many strategies and tactics for doing this. He wants to have an impact in his work immediately, but he has a lot to say in his work. So his work is not simple. It's not like a one-liner or a joke. It keeps telling you things, and you keep finding things in it the more you look at it. So for instance, in this piece, you have this little sort of domestic scene up here. How does that relate to this? Again, this is a painting that's in the show, so you can look for yourself and you can speculate for yourself. And again, pay attention to what is becoming visible and what attracts your attention as you're looking at the piece and how that attention shifts. This is one of my favorite pieces of the show because this really exemplifies what I'm talking about. This is called Woman Pushing 40. And again, in the American context, there was a tendency to emphasize youth, and as it appears in advertising and in the public consciousness. And this is a woman on the cusp of moving out of that space of youth. What is she going to do? How does that title relate to the image? Well, again, you examine the painting closely and you move up close to it and you begin to see that it begins to dissolve as an image, begins to resolve into parts and pieces. For instance, the lips of the woman. You can't notice it here, of course, because you're seeing this as a projection, as if you were seeing it from a distance. But when you get very close, there's a shadow, or what seems to be a shadow, behind the painted lips. So the lips almost lift off of the face. And the face seems to be, in a sense, decomposing into different visual parts. And the space, the mass of the head as it's rendered through the illusion of space, starts to fall apart. Another question I would have about this painting is, what is the function of this very large empty space here? How does that work against the painting? And I mean within the painting, I'm sorry. And how does that balance this figure? You know, she's not centered. And I feel that Jan was often working with form as metaphor, and the rendering of the piece, how it's done in every part, has a semantic potential. It has a potential to have meaning, and as a viewer, you can read the painting and find those meanings for yourself. Of course, your version will be unique because you are unique.
It's a one-man show.
One-man
title.
show.
Yeah,
one-man show.
One-man show too.
Yes. Yeah. There were 4 of these originally. These were shown in LA and 1 was sold. So there are 3 in the show. And again, Jan is working with the idea of types of people that you'll see within the American context. And again, he's thinking about this person is carrying America with him. And how is he doing that? I mean, we all sort of carry our own America with us. And this is sort of a representation of that. What kind of person is this? And one of the great things about Jan's work, for me, is that his sense of perspective on the individuals that he depicts is always presented with a sense of empathy for them. They are always individuals, even if they may be types that are in some ways quite brutal. In a sense, it's the conditions that are creating the people. And his question is always, you know, what's the effect on the human being of the conditions in which they're living? How am I doing?
Oh, stop. Wait, let's see if they see it. Look
Okay,
at it, and
here's an image.
is there something missing? What's that? Oh, from the reflection. Oh, you
Yes,
saw it right away.
right.
Sometimes people don't catch it.
Right. In conversation with Hanna Sawka,
My
Jan's
mom.
Jan's
Because we're
widow.
both Hannah, just to confuse everybody.
Yes. Yes. With Hanna Sawka, she said, "Here's a guy who's got it made." Okay. She thought this painting was very, very funny.
Oh, print.
Print.
Actually,
I'm sorry.
I definitely want to say something about
Yes.
how it's made.
Yes.
So this was etched into a plate. It's a very old technique, like, you know, that started out, I think, in the Renaissance, that kind of etching. Like I associate it with DREAN. So hours of etching, you know, running it through the printer by hand, the printing press by hand, and then he would hand color them. So I just wanted to draw your attention to it being very contemporary in what it's showing and what it's doing, but the technique is actually very old. And my father attended, I mean, he got his Master in Fine Arts from the Wrocław Academy of Fine Arts. Or, oh, wait, did I say that? They changed their name later. I'm pretty sure that's what it was called back then. And this is etched with a single steel needle that he got from his mentor and professor, Stanisław Dawski. It was a pre-war needle, so it represented kind of, you know, the time before utter destruction. And he etched everything. There are several other dry point etchings in the show, and it's like hours and hours. I remember my dad sitting and etching, you know, he also had an allergy, so he didn't work in metal plates. He switched to acrylic glass or plexiglass, and there's no way to fix mistakes in that. If you're working with a metal plate, you can hammer out mistakes or you can use chemicals, but this was it. You know, you just, you know, you could spend hours and mess up and you're done. So I really wanted to bring to your attention that beside paintings, you know, we've got these dry point etchings, and we also have some drawings, you know, that were done with a nib pen. And if you go in the show, the abandoned streetcar is an example of a drawing, and the postcards of the palm trees, also a dry point etching. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Right, and that's actually a whole other subject, because Jan was trained in painting and printing at the same time, and he often treated prints like paintings and paintings like prints. And he often would represent visual aspects of one medium in the other. He hand-colored his prints partly because it was more economical to do that. Otherwise, you would have to print with many different colors, and it would be very expensive. And he just colored them by himself, so each one is unique, each example. I remember visiting him in the studio, and he'd be listening to music constantly and talking to me at the same time, and over on a field of color that he had painted in acrylic, he would be drawing black lines to essentially replicate the appearance of a print. This happened many times.
Well, so you want to say something about the guy who got it made.
Well, what I wanted to say about this, the reason I included this or asked that this be included among our images, is that this is one of the pieces from the Claire Schulberg collection. This is one of the pieces that Bob Schulberg picked as something that he wanted, that particularly suited his taste. And I think a very important part of this show is that it represents the vision of the artist and the taste of the artist's friend and collector, and how they came together. They shared a kind of absurd sense of humor. And the swimming pool is there to act as a mnemonic for me so that I'll remember to tell you this story. Hanna Sawka, Jan's widow, told me that Bob lived very high up in Beverly Hills. And he had a swimming pool that was taken away by a mudslide, so that all that was left was the deck and the staircase going down into nothing. And he kept it. He liked it that way. He thought it was hilarious. And when Jan and Hanna came and visited him, he took them out back. He said, "Jan, you'll love this." Took him out and showed it to him. Again, they shared a kind of vision of the world. And I think this is part of, for me, one of the important messages of the show, which is that Bob was in the dream-making machinery. He was very high up in marketing for CBS radio on the West Coast. He wrote a standard textbook on radio marketing that was published in 1991 and is still in print. It's one of the standard books about the subject. He was in the establishment, but he was not of the establishment. He had a way of looking at the world that meshed or complemented or worked with Jan's way of looking at the world, this artist sort of skeptically looking at things and using his talent to explore things and to express things that we're not complacent, that we're believing but still questioning always. Because Jan very much believed in the promise of America. He believed in the Golden West, but it was always questioned. And it was questioned not sourly or with anger, really. Finally, it was questioned with a sense of humor. And Bob shared that with him.
Could I introduce the next theme?
Oh, yeah, next.
I forgot that I put this is a drawing, but made very much in an etching style, like what Frank was talking about. So if the show just had the first big room, it wouldn't be complete. And it's because if you have a situation where, commodification is really, it's about selling, right? And if we want to sell, we want to create a feel of need for things, right? And we want to make feelings of novelty, right? So if we're buying lots of stuff and things have novelty, well, novelty wears off very quickly then, right? And there was actually a study done recently that most things that people buy don't even last 3 months. We have like a crisis of things floating in the sea, right? And plastic and all of that. So, kind of the other side of the machine and selling and buying and all of this is that things get abandoned quickly. Okay, so we kind of started playing with the theme of, and the works were talking, about it. Themes of abandonment, emptiness. So we've got out there kind of like a diorama, the moving landscape. It's a truck that's fallen apart in front of, in old Hollywood, when they made a scene that somebody was driving, they would turn, like a sky in the back so it looked like the car was driving. And it's totally abandoned. It's just been left there. And then, of course, here you have a abandoned San Francisco streetcar, and it's got these strange reflections. They, of course, don't make sense, right? Over here you have a totally different sky. Over there you've got a little bit of the Golden Gate Bridge with a bit different weather. It's not real. It's probably dreams. When my mom and I talked about it, she said it's the dreams of the people who were riding in the streetcar. Of course, it's open to your interpretation, but it is abandoned. And the streetcar itself is kind of sad, and yet there are these dreams in the cracked windows. So that's, the first piece just in the slideshow, but, it's in the gallery, and there are more pieces going along the themes, and that's in the second room. We really wanted it to be pretty distinct, the two halves. Am I giving away too much?
No.
Okay.
You're fine. Yeah, it's to be noted that this was done before Jan and his family moved to the United States. This was done in 1976. So again, he's working from imagery that he got as imagery, and he's recycling it. He's again, Jan never directly copied from anything. He only would work, or very, very rarely would work from photographs, and it was for specific purposes.
Or from or from like still light. Like he wouldn't
he
draw something he was looking at.
He wouldn't
It's
draw
always in his
this.
mind. Yeah.
He would always draw from the image in his mind. And in fact, when he did his dry point engravings, Hanna Sawka,
My mom, not me.
yes, told me that his method was to take the piece of acrylic glass and put a white sheet of paper under it, a blank sheet of paper under it, and then began etching from one corner and just basically etch the image in one continuous...
Like he wouldn't even outline it.
He wouldn't outline it. He wouldn't. He was projecting the image directly from his mind. So this image is a cable car, but it's the cable car as it exists in his mind. So it's a cable car that is filled with emotion, and his thoughts about this. So again, it's that this is the Golden West. Okay, this is before he came, and already he's questioning, he's wondering about it. The tracks go nowhere. Okay, the surroundings of it are very indistinct. It's like this specific piece of America right there. And it's both this kind of dream image, as Hanna put it, but it's a dream image that there's something fragile about it.
Yeah, actually, speaking of that fragility, you know, my dad grew up in a post-cataclysmic landscape. World War II in Poland was hell on earth. We were invaded by both the Nazis and the Soviet army, like 17 days apart. Those two nations had made an agreement to mutually just go after the country in between, including targeting, actually, there's luckily more coming out about it, that there was an actual plan called Intelligenzaktion, which meant go after the educated people. And my family from both sides made that list. So we have, we are Catholic Poles, and we have quite a list of people who died in concentration camps. It includes a 15-year-old who was killed by lethal injection. I just found out about cousins who were experimented upon medically and who live somewhere in England. I don't even know their names. I just recently found out about them. And, you know, and the landscape, I mean, when my dad was a kid, was like, you know, ruins and rubble. And there were so many things that showed kind of former glory that were now just empty shells. You know, you could see signs of prosperity, even though Poland had already been, Poland had only been free for 20 years before World War II. Prior to that, it had been occupied it had been partitioned between three countries, and generally things were not good, especially in the Russian part of, and the Prussian partitions. But still, I mean, compared to what happened. And that 20 years in between, like, people were hopeful. People were coming back from abroad with money, investing. You know, they were really trying to, you know, get things on their feet. And the next thing that happened was utter devastation. So abandoned objects, I think, had just also a real interest to him. We're opening another show in an academic museum on the East Coast in the Hudson Valley, and there's a piece there called Asbury Notebook. We vacationed because we had very little money in the first years, and we vacationed in Asbury Park, which had experienced race riots a few years earlier, and there were empty shells of restaurants. And my dad actually depicted Asbury Park as he saw it then multiple times, you know, and it just resonated with this feeling of ruin of people having lost things, you know, of memories of better times. So this abandonment theme definitely had this, you know, angle to it. The other thing is, like, with things like the moving landscape, the diorama, for people who just had a huge war, you can't waste things. You're like repurposing everything. Like you're putting things away because you might be able to use them for something. So that's a big contrast from the culture here. Of, you know, you could just use it and throw it out. It's fine. You know, I mean, I can still observe in my household sometimes too much. Like, Mom, we really don't need to put all those, like, I don't know, like scraps of wire or whatever away. Like, we need room. So, you know, definitely like that surely, you know, colored, you know, this work as well.
And here we are. Here's...
And this is from before coming to the U.S. And we have landscapes like this in the Hudson Valley, like sunken trucks.
Right, the trailer, the truck, you know, again, the American relationship with the automobile, and the idea that it's kind of sinking into the quicksand, if you will.
Of time and
of
abandonment.
Time and abandonment.
By the way, this is called a weekend.
Right.
Just
so
the humor.
Again, irony, humor, and skepticism. And
it's an etching.
And again,
Too.
you know, carefully observe how things are done, how they're framed, how he's using the frame. He's playing constantly with all the different formal elements and the illusionistic elements of the particular image or images that he's working on, in order to follow up on his ideas and express his feelings and explore his feelings. And if you look carefully and, you know, notice where things are varied and manipulated or changed or worked over in a particular way, you can follow through with your own sort of train of thought as you're exploring what's right there in front of you. It opens that up for you. If you keep asking, you know, what is he saying with this? Why did he do that? Up. One step too far.
Oh,
maybe it's two.
We messed it up, didn't we? Okay. Screen.
Let's come back all the way to the last image.
Okay, slow down, or you'll skip it again.
Coming back, one more.
There
we go.
Well, this you've really got to see in there.
Yes.
It does not come across well.
It doesn't read, but here it is. And this is
Talking Home.
Talking Home, and it's a kind of concatenation.
Tuck into that.
It's a concatenation of many different empty rooms, treated in many, many, many different ways. There are different lighting conditions, different furniture. He runs all the changes, but they're all empty. And you can read it in many different directions, an infinite number of different directions, and spend a lot of time on it. And each empty room feels different. The feeling you get as you're looking at it is different. And we included this in the exhibition because there's a sense, again, when you question how are the social conditions, how are the ways of the place, of America, of the Golden West. How are they affecting human beings? How is our environment affecting us? We felt that this resonated with that because this is our environment in a certain sense. We all live in a home, and in a sense, this is evoking what that home would say. There's another piece out there that is essentially an empty room filled with the images as if it was filled with the memories that the room has of the events that happened in it. So we felt those two pieces sort of spoke to the sense, you know, not a simplistic kind of idea of emptiness so much as, you know, I'm reminded of a passage in a book by Robert Coles, The Spiritual Life of Children. And in that book, he is talking to a Hopi girl out in Arizona. And this little girl says to him, "The land would miss us if we went away." And there's something in this, you know. It's almost an intensity of feeling that passes beyond the people that that Jan has represented to be the space that we inhabit. And how does it feel about us in a way? Okay? So I will be quiet now.
And, you know, when you come into the show, like the first image of the crazy lady, right? Well, the, like, exaggerated sexy lady that's supposed to sell stuff, that's very far removed from the paintings, the works that are about these rooms, where that's reality. That's the actual room you're in. That's not the billboard anymore, right? Not the image. That's you in the room. Are you alone in the room? Are you happy with others in the room, right? And the room is the space of your actual life, right? So kind of the flow of the show is, you know, first you see some of the work that's about, the images and these things that are supposed to make you feel certain ways, play off of your feelings. And as you progress, you know, and you confront these rooms, it's, it's what's real, really. So, I don't know. I think maybe, are we going to do like a Q&A kind of? Yeah, it kind of feels.
I'd like to do one last note on that, and that's that, again, there's sort of this through line, this underline of that, again, that relationship between Bob and Jan, because that's, you know, also the reality. It's the connection of the people, the real connections between people, beyond the hype, you know, beyond the differences between people. You know, a very establishment person working in the dream factory reaches out to this impecunious artist in Poland and essentially, you know, helps to save his family and remains his friend until one of them dies. You know, that's real too.
I mean, it's a little bit of a sad note, but I want to say that the last time my dad met Bob, he'd gotten a commission from the Grateful Dead to create an art installation for their 25th anniversary. And Bob was so proud. He was proud, like, of his, it was like of his own son, in a sense. And my dad had invited him over to see the actual airbrushing of these huge, it was a 10-story installation made of colorful banners, and they were being airbrushed, and because they were so big, the airbrushing was happening in Howard Hughes' gigantic airplane hangar. and it was monumental, you know. So I think Dad was very happy that, you know, I mean, it was a big blow to lose Bob for our family, but at least he got to see something so exciting and so big and ambitious before he passed away. So yeah, let's turn it over. Diego, I'll bet you'll do the honors. If you'd like to ask some questions, no more.
Do
if
we have any
anything was
questions?
confusing.
Questions from the audience?
Comments are cool too. I didn't like that. That's cool. I like that. You know, fill in the blanks.
I certainly have a question.
Diego's going to start you off.
Okay, so there are a lot of things that we have as far as themes in this show, and each one of them is incredibly complex, and there's so much depth of thought. Was this a progression in his thought, or was this something that was all happening simultaneously? Is it one day he's really
it was
pouring his soul?
simultaneous. It was simultaneous. So
It just seems so incredible for him to be thinking about. We have, you know, the themes of abandonment, themes of a commodity, and also the room, this idea of the room and it holding memory. So it just seems.
I mean, if you look at the
really
dates,
complex.
you'll see it's like a whole mix. You can't really trace that too much. Yeah.
It's like a kind of almost like a cloud of thought and feeling that was there all the time, and particular lightning rods would, you know, call down a bolt, and Jan would essentially see a vision of something, and he would do it.
And he'd often be working on things, like he'd work a bit on a painting and put it down, then he'd go and etch, and then he'd go and do another thing. It's like he, you know, spinning multiple plates. Yeah,
Right.
I don't know, that's how he did it.
Right.
Jan, you said one was visited out here a number of times. Once he moved, actually even before he moved here, but
Yeah.
after he left Poland. I was wondering, first of all, how his actual visits, his upfront experience with California, with the West Coast, influenced and moderated his depictions of it. And second of all, why he didn't move the family
I have
here.
the same question. No, I'm kidding. Well, okay, I can answer that first one. There's a cover in there that he did for Westways magazine. It's called Sunset Boulevard. And he actually walked down Sunset Boulevard, and I think he even got accosted by a cop, are you okay? What are you doing here? You know, and he was like, no, I'm fine. I mean, I think he saw it as a pretty surreal, you know, experience. I mean, you know, at that time, you know, there was an issue of visual pollution of billboards. You know, since then, it was all over the world. I mean, if you watch a Fellini film, right, from that time, there's one that keeps showing billboards all over the place. Obviously, Italy had an issue with this too. You know, he would visit Bob, who lived up at the top of Beverly Hills, and then he'd go exploring, you know, on his own. He went and walked down a lot of, you know, these streets. Carless, you know, Bob would, you know, they'd arrange to meet or whatever. So there was definitely, he explored, he was curious about it. And then there was the relationship with the gallery, especially with the Joan Ankrum. And I know he really enjoyed it because it was a great scene, really interesting people came to the shows. They had a connection. Her husband was an actor, he played in 5 Easy Pieces. So there was kind of a mix of the art crowd and also the Ankrams, yeah. Also, you know, actors and kind of, you you know, the Hollywood crowd. Actually, the Grateful Dead connection started because of a show at Ankrum, because somebody came and saw the show, who actually, it was Leonard Cohen's manager or producer or something like that, and through them, the word got out to Jerry Garcia and to Hal Kant, became my dad's collector for years, which my dad didn't even know about. So, but why didn't we move there?
Maybe you were in school.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Maybe.
it just didn't really come up as like something they discussed. I mean, I think, you know, they had a lot of friends in New York that, you know, became like, you know, family as well. And then actually the goal for him was to have a studio, a big studio, like as soon as he could manage it. And, you know, the place to look for that seemed to be the Hudson Valley. I mean, and that had to do with, he met artists, you know, through the gallery, particularly one artist, Rich Corazine, who actually got into the gallery because one day the gallerist left for lunch, and I'm pretty sure it was Sid Deutsch.
I think it's Deutsch.
Yeah, Sid Deutsch went out for a meeting or for lunch, and he asked my dad to watch the gallery. And Dad's sitting like at the desk, like it's like he's the gallerist. And Rich comes in with his portfolio, and you know what happens usually when an artist comes with a portfolio. I mean, now you can't even see the gallerist, you'll see the gallerina, right? But Rich hands him his portfolio. My dad starts looking at it, and he's like, this is great. This is great. And Rich is like, oh my God. And then he finds out he's not the gallerist. But actually, he did represent him for a time. My dad pitched Rich Corazine, yeah. So Dad pitched Rich to Sid, and Sid was like, okay, he does cool work. So anyway, he was our friend outside of the city, and in an area where my dad thought, well, I could find something big and good. And it was actually, my parents went house hunting with Rich as their guide when they found the property in High Falls with the big Quaker wooden peg construction stable, which he then, you know, transformed into the studio. So I don't know, I think it was just like, the goal wasn't a place in particular, the goal was a studio. And it seemed like that was the closest place where, you know, and it was connected to New York where, you know, he had gallery representation. Initially, you know, that was kind of, yeah, he did a lot of work for the Times and actually for the Boston Globe and also for Marsh and McLennan, like pretty creepy outfit of like doing analysis for corporations, like what market are we going to exploit now? So he, as soon as he got his gallery career going, he kind of stepped away from the illustrations because he felt there was kind of a stigma of like, I'll be seen as a commercial artist, and he worried about how that would affect his career. You know, he saw himself as a fine artist. He enjoyed doing the illustrations. I mean, some of them were really, you know, there's nothing like getting the Soviet embassy to lodge a complaint with the State Department, calling you a psychopath, you know, for your political commentary illustration. I think
6 times.
Yeah, I think that made him pretty happy, you know. Well, he felt it was like, it was an opportunity to express something, you know.
They wish they had gotten their Jan Sawka back for those buses. 6 times.
Yeah, so, yeah.
How aware was your dad of American art? Because that theme of the empty space is something we associate with Edward Hopper, for instance.
He loved Hopper.
And
Yeah.
we also, sometimes he treats it also, I see Wayne Thiebaud in his work, Richard Diebenkorn. I'm not saying in his work, but I'm seeing parallels.
Oh, he absolutely followed American art very much, you know, and like when he was out at the Aspen Art and Design Conference, like he saw met those people, he saw all the exhibitions, you know, he would go to other galleries. You know, he was very interested in what was going on. And, you know, actually Eva just pointed out what looks like an influence of a German designer from the early 20th century. Like he was, you know, yeah. Yeah. So,
Many designers. We actually had a show by David Berg, posters to music events, and he was also influenced by Lucinda.
yeah. So, I mean, Dad spent a lot of time looking at what other people were doing, and he felt, I mean, it seemed like, I mean, he was like absorbing stuff, observing it. He read all the time too, you know. He had to have his Granta magazine and read it back to back, you know, the literary publication. You know, he was just super curious and very, I mean, like he would speak very passionately about what was happening in art, what he didn't like, what he did like, you know. When he would go out to biennial, I remember when he was out in Florence in 2003, at the biennial there, he came back and was like, I saw this Turkish artist's work about light. It was so amazing. And he made friends with an Irish landscape painter, you know, loved what he was doing. Like he was very excited about what other people were doing. He also, like he introduced Rich to the Sid Deutsch gallery. He would try to help young artists. And he also worked in kind of, well, he volunteered as a mentor in Japan with an organization that promotes and spots young talent, you know, among artists. And he actually tried pitching a show of young Japanese artists here in the US. He did pitch a show of the Japanese artist Kiyoshi Awazu to the Polish National Museums, and Awazu got a tour. It was phenomenal. It was just amazing. So he was really into other people's work and activities, and he followed it and was involved in it as well. And he was, you know, he was totally picking up things, interested in what he saw somebody doing, experimenting with it. So he was very much, you know, he wasn't just like a hermit and sitting. I mean, when he was working, he did look like a hermit for that time. Like, there was definitely a hermit thing going on. But then when he was like not working, you know, he was really curious and very active.
I'd like to address Peter's, a part of Peter's earlier question, which was, how did his vision of America change in his art from before he came to America and after he had direct experience with America? And I'm trying to figure this out. I'm thinking about this a lot because you know, each piece is sort of so individual that I haven't been able to work out any kind of simple formulation of that very question. In a sense, it feels like he had a kind of stance to the world, a kind of believe, be enthusiastic, put your faith and hope in it, but watch out. And he kind of had that stance to the world, and he funded that stance from many different sources. But it was almost like his art was coming directly from his personality. And he developed his style and many of the things that he did in his art very young. By the time he won the awards in Cannes-sur-Mer, which I believe was in 1976? 75. By the time he won those in 1975, he had already developed his method of working across media between prints and paintings and accumulating images in the way that he worked here and experimenting with that. So it's kind of like he had this big repertoire of things he could do, and he had the best training that was available, and had picked the artists that he drew upon for inspiration, technically, who were primarily Renaissance artists, but also artists of young Poland at the turn of the century. And he kind of developed this artistic worldview, a way of being that I think was not closed off to any new influences, but there was this incredibly solid base that things were incorporated into. I mean, particularly later when he started traveling to Japan and working in Japan and you know, studying and working with Japanese and Chinese motifs, he was just absorbing this material like a sponge.
Like everything.
Like it, you know, just.
It was like new cool stuff.
And he was using it, but
Yeah.
you know, he in his artwork, but he was using it in the way that he used everything in his artwork. And he told me when he designed for Abu Dhabi, he did some architectural projects for them, and he said, you know, I knew about this stuff from books that my father had left at the house when he was in prison, you know, that he had shipped to the house. And so he, you know, he had always been sort of an art sponge. So that's the best account of.
That's the sense I got, that's why I asked.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes. Can you wait for the mic?
It's just a quick, simple question.
Sure.
It's about the painting with the pool. I wanted to ask, was that like a political statement that he was trying to make? The reason why I say that is because in the pool, I've noticed, you know, with the reflection, it almost looks to me as if it's a wall. And it was reminiscent, like kind of like of the Berlin Wall, and hence the men are showing on one side being like, it's not as it seems, depending on what side you're on that wall.
I mean, I'm sure he meant the wall, the way that you get it, because privilege is behind walls for the most part. And he definitely, oh yeah, I mean, this is an observation, you know, of life in California. It's not the only work with a swimming pool. You know, and a swimming pool in California is an object of privilege because you have limited water, right? You know, so, I mean, you know, he was fascinated by it in that sense, absolutely. And, you know, if you're from behind the Iron Curtain, you do think about walls, you know, but, I mean, this is an observation just of what he saw here. And you are absolutely, I mean, the wall is very solid here. It's darker than most elements. It's meant to stand out, and it is exactly.
And it's doubled with
Yeah.
the reflection.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It's like, yeah, it's there,
But
and
you-
it's what you said.
But you also have a world on the other side of the wall indicated by those little bits of tree over here, which both balances him and indicates that he's missing something.
Had he ever visited East Berlin while that wall was up?
He might.
I mean,
he might have toured there
Whether
with
he
Stu.
was, yeah, I mean, he did a bunch of traveling around Europe, but no, like he got sent, like parachuted out west into like France and England. But everyone was aware, like that wall was a symbol to everyone, you know, and everyone knew about where all the rabbits live, right? No man's land, you know. It was a thing people were almost physically aware of, you know?
He's inferring a parallel between the walls of retention in the communist states and the gated communities of Los Angeles.
Right.
The composition also goes to this, which has all this recessional space blocked off by
Right.
a powerful plane, is right out of, well, parallels Tebow again.
Yeah. So again, the more you look at it, the less kind of funny it is. And it's meant to do that. It's meant to possibly just entertain you for a moment. Hey, there's no guy in the pool, reflected in the pool, but, you know, there's usually a lot more going on. And thanks for bringing that up.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
Well, I just, by the way, in the back of the room over here is Mark Rosenthal, who actually worked on some projects with my dad. So that would include a theatrical spectacle in Japan, The Eyes, that my dad won the Japanese Cultural Agency Award. Included incredible projections, kind of. And Mark here came in with his touch and his expertise in projections and how to do them, to have the artwork kind of dissolving one into another. And also back projected. It was back projected or front projected? Back for Steve Winwood's reunion. That was front, yeah, reunion tour. And you guys also did some projections on skyscrapers for NASA's 40th anniversary. Was it 40th or? What was that? What the hell was Sky Power about? Who knows? It was actually, my dad was like, it was the launching of a political career. But, so thank you so much, Mark, for coming out and joining us. And by the way, don't you have, you weren't here for this story about the pool, the landslide pool, but I think you have some landslide story too. I think it's an LA thing. So.
We appreciate it.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks,
thank you so
everybody
much
who came.
for having
Thank you very
us and for
much.
having the show.
Thank you for having the show.